Hey everybody. So far it's been a good Sunday. It was a good message at church. After church there was a meeting that I was allowed to sit in on, and I'm getting myself uh, more involved now in the church. I got an official listing now. Um, and I'm very, very, very happy about that. And it kind of gives me my topic of discussion. I talk a lot about the company you keep. And especially how it relates to churches. They say, you know, don't forget that Jesus once healed somebody because of his friend's faith. So it really does matter your circle. I like that saying because it's a good point. And another is, what are you doing with your time? It's not just the people you have around you, it's the habits that you have. I have a lot of bad habits, and I've slowly been trying to break some of them. You know, and I'm not saying you have to grind all the time. That's actually the opposite. Like, you do have to take breaks and take care of yourself. Take care of your body. But um, if you really want to, get your full potential, then everything you do, there's that saying that I use. I love it. If it doesn't evolve me, it doesn't involve me. So if it is not something that is going to end, for your good, anything that's going to bring you closer to God or closer to your genuine life goals, your dreams, then why, your most precious resource is your time and attention. That's the thing that we don't know how much we have, and it can be up at any time. So guard them. Don't waste them. I've done enough of that myself. Trying to pursue things that either didn't want to be or shouldn't have been pursued. Take your pick. So yeah, once you figure out for sure what you want, you know, I recent experiences have told me what I don't want around me. The kind of people, the kind of treatment I will not accept. And now that I am around, you know, a better class of people, which I can say that because I can't stand people who have no empathy or people who have no accountability. I can't stand to be around people like that anymore. I've had my fill of those kind of people over the last few years. That it just makes my skin crawl. You know, sorry, was ruminating over something. So yeah, be very. I've talked about this before about living with intent. Be intentional. Use your time wisely. You know, don't confuse using your time wisely with time is money. Because think about it the other way: money is time. Let that one sink in. How much of your life are you letting people take away? For what? You know, for convenience that's inconvenient? For the ones that want to price gouge you and give you a little less but take a little more? It really really irks me that, when I bring up conversations like this around people, they shut down. Like, it really is. They are dead serious in that speech on the Matrix about people being so hopelessly inured with the system that their brain glitches when you try to get them to think like for themselves and like, hey, this doesn't make sense, right? And then they'll argue with you and say, okay, well then, if it makes sense to you, explain it to me. And they cannot do it. That's just how it is. Yeah, no, that's not. That is not acceptable. And if you accept that answer, you're a bigger idiot than I think. Yeah, I said it. If you are not at all curious about the events that direct your life, you are an idiot. I don't mean that to be, well, that is kind of condescending, but again, I don't say it to be nasty, I'm just stating facts. How many people shut their brains off and just accept what life is throwing at them, and nobody stops and says, wait a minute, why do I continuously have this issue? Or why is this always seem to be a problem? But people don't take the time to, think about those things. It really scares me, when I talk to people about stuff like that. You either have your ones that are happily oblivious, who don't even want to think about it. Then you have the ones that are, don't rock the boat type. Like, yeah, there's something wrong here, but I'm afraid to speak up about it because what's going to happen to me if I do say something? It's the wrong way to live, folks. What you are not changing, you are choosing. So what are you choosing for yourself? What are you allowing to continue in your life? Are you accepting the unacceptable? Because if you are, you can change that. But you got to face it. You got to be willing to think about it. I don't know. I'm like very on the fence with my faith in humanity. Like, very much. Like, I do believe there is good in people. Because I've seen some of it. Even today. Not as much of it as I used to. But I do still see it. But on the other hand, we are a dying breed. We really are. That was something else I wanted to talk about is, if you're real serious about this journey, don't just, do the journaling and the reading of the Bible. Get yourself to a church, but find a good church. I did. Mine's an old school, it's a Methodist church, which is what I grew up in. Great people, great services. I generally get fired up, when pastor gives his message, and that is the important part. Is that, does it make you feel alive? Does it make you want to worship? That's the important part in finding your church. Now remember, it's not going to be sunshine and rainbows all the time. You do have to face, the reality, and there are some things people don't like to deal with, but you kind of have to. But yeah, get out there. Start, even if you sit in the back, and that's another good test too, to find out if it's a good church or not. If you go in there just because you're curious, because you want some answers, and you hang out in the back, and if people are genuinely kind to you and ask if you need anything, and if they take an interest in you, then you're in a good church. Now, if people keep, kind of looking at you and give you that side eye and keep their distance from you, it's not a good church. Because Christians know it is our job to reach out to anybody and everybody. Knock and the door will open. Ask and it'll be answered. Our duty is to pass down the teachings of Jesus, is to share the good news of the gospel, is to try and bring peace to people's lives. Jesus was all about the ones that, the tax collectors, the prostitutes, the people in prison. Your church should look like a hospital. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's nice when you have a good congregation, everybody's upbeat and on the path, but if you're really doing your job, then you're attracting in the ones that are curious. The problem is there's not enough people curious in the world right now. The numbers for the churches are, it's weird. Some reports I hear are dwindling, like especially in leadership roles. But then other aspects, now just recently there's a resurgence because people, after living the way this world has been going for a while, some people are starting to take an interest and getting a little curious again, which makes me hopeful. Again, that's why I say I'm on the fence with my faith in humanity right now. Again, some people don't like the thoughts that religion brings up to them, and listen, I get it. I am not a religious person myself. I'm really not. I'm a man of faith. There's a difference. But if you can do that, for yourself, it will change your life. It really will. You got to be willing to, give it a shot. And again, make sure, don't just go to the first place, you think of and say, "Oh, well, I didn't really care for it, so that's the end." Like, no. Remember what I said, the advice I gave. When the pastor's done their message, if you feel energetic, if you feel like doing something, whether it be something positive in the community, something positive for yourself, righting a wrong, looking, doing some introspection, seeing where you got to change and to make yourself better. Not, again, I tell people all the time, do not look at the Bible as a rule book. It is a guidebook, and there is a difference. That's God telling you, hey, we tried this, or this is not how you were designed. This does not work for you. And I think one of the things that upsets me the most about modern times is how many people are just straight up contrarian. Like, if you say hot, they got to say cold. You say red, they got to say blue. You say, up, they got to say down. And not because they genuinely have an opinion on it, it's because they feel the need to just be the complete opposite. Because they're not in a discussion for a solution or any kind of, reconciliation. They are strictly there to piss you off. That is a bad faith argument. Do not waste your time and attention on people like that. Don't. Now, if someone, has a genuine, argument, if there's merit to what they're saying, then obviously no. But again, that's where discernment comes in. You got to get rid of that binary black and white thinking. You got to. You got to think outside the box. Do not conform in every aspect. Do not. You're giving yourself away when you do that. You are, taking away from your own power. Your power to create your own reality. Because if you are conforming to everybody else, guess what? You're not creating your own. You know, life isn't meant to be cookie cutter everything. We're not all supposed to live in the same kind of houses. We're not all supposed to have the same haircut. We're not all supposed to do the same, have the same hobbies. Uh, that is what is beautiful, is our diversity, how different we are. But again, getting rid of that binary thinking, part of that beauty is the other side of that is the things that do make us all the same. We are all living in the same place at the same time. We all exist together. That in itself is just, the odds are astronomical. It is a miracle just in that alone. But in the fact we all have very similar physiology, we all have similar, the same needs: food, water, air, shelter, companionship, because we are social creatures. And don't let, if someone says something and it really doesn't hit you as right, I mean, if there's facts, then you got to face up to facts, like serious. But, if it doesn't hit you right, don't accept a truth that isn't your truth. When I first started doing this process, like I said, I had to get rid of a lot of faulty, for lack of a better word, programming. I took things at face value that people taught me, that now, that I examined it a little closer, put it under a microscope. I was like, no, I don't believe this. And again, that's how you break free of that binary thinking. Life requires effort. It's not all campfires and kumbaya. You have to put effort into life. You have to work. You have to farm. Feed people. Well, however that is. And honestly, I'd prefer the old way. The new way is too corrupted. But again, people getting that don't rock the boat mentality. That is the way it is. Nothing I can do about it. That's true. There's nothing you as an individual can do about it, but there's plenty you as the masses can do about it. But instead, everybody wants to, separate themselves by differences, conform, so they're surrounded by, an echo chamber. A real solid good friend is somebody who will challenge you with your thoughts. They're not afraid to correct you if they think that you're stepping out of, your boundaries. It's not a competition. We all want to have, the same kind of ending, basically. Everybody just wants to be happy and enjoy at least part of life. Again, we realize it's not going to be, beautiful the entire time, but you got to enjoy at least some of it. And if you're not enjoying it, again, take that time, reflect, ask yourself why. Figure it out. Really examine. Because I promise, if you break down and you think about the way you think, why you think, what you think, it will change the way you think just by examining it. I promise. Question everything. And again, that does not mean be that contrarian that I was talking about. Don't argue with everything. Right? Do not confuse the two. Question everything. Make sure, you have an understanding of it. Because again, you have to understand it and know if it's good or bad for you. And if it's bad for you, you got to understand it and know how to change it. Again, too many people have no interest, no curiosity in the things that day to day control their lives. It blows my mind. People just accept things. It's nuts. You do yourself a disservice doing that. Just because an idea comes from one source doesn't mean every idea they have is always good. We are human beings. We are fallible. We make mistakes. We are all capable, and anyone who tells you they don't is making a big one right there in itself. If you refuse to be correctable, you will never grow. You will never improve on yourself. We're all flawed. No getting around it. But it's how you choose to address those flaws. Are you going to look away and ignore them? Or are you going to say, hey, you know what? I'm tired of this outcome, so I'm going to change this about myself and see if I can't change my life for the better. And that's, what it's all about. That's what I choose to do in my life. And that's how I would like to spend my time. Always improving, doing better. All right, as usual, I'm going over time, but I just really want to give you, a lot of food for thought. Get yourself involved in your community. Your surroundings matter. And if you are in a community that you don't want to be a part of, again, start figuring out what necessary changes need to be made to change that. Either by making the area you're in by improving it, or by giving yourself the means to get out of that area and get somewhere where you're more comfortable. That works for, where you're living. That works for your education. That works for what you do for, working. That works for yourself. How can I make this better? And that's what it all boils down to. And you won't find out until you start questioning things. That's why I say make that distinction. I'm not saying question everything, again, to argue with it. I'm saying question with it because, one, don't just blindly accept things. If it feels like it fits, if it feels like it is truth, then yes, accept it. Again, if there's solid evidence, just remember that fear is false evidence appearing real. So know the difference. That was a strong hint right there. If it makes you afraid, there's something you're missing. There's something you're not seeing when you look at it. That's why you're afraid of it. It's a blind spot. That means you got to look at it harder. You got to figure out, you got to put your finger on what it is, why it's not right. Then you can fix it. You don't conquer your fears by ignoring them or running away from them. You conquer your fears by facing them. And let me tell you, if you can be fearless, oof, talk about a game changer. It seriously is. But that requires faith. And that's why I strongly suggest get involved. You know, I do strongly recommend a church, but I do know that church isn't the thing for everybody. It has to be positive. It has to be something that gets you involved with community. That's the main important part. Everything else will correct itself as we move along, but that's where we want to start, because that's how we start bringing people together. That's how we start making a difference for the positive. That's how we stop accepting the unacceptable. We got to be able to, come together. It's ironic because you got to find your comfort zone, but then when you find it, you can't trap yourself to it. You have to be willing to explore and expand it. But again, that goes back to got to change your thinking. Anywho, I think that's enough babbling for one time. Take care of yourself. Try and, keep taking care of each other. I know it's getting harder and harder out there, but we can do it. Don't give up. I'll catch you in the next one.